Hi, I'm Heather, and today at Spirits Freedom Farm we're going to talk about dehydrating foods for long-term shelf storage. Today we're going to talk about dehydrating foods, and that's one way that you can preserve foods for long-term storage. It's a great way that doesn't require electricity necessarily, and you can keep foods for, as long as they're sealed up well, you can keep them for a long time. Two important things when you're dehydrating food are airflow and moisture. So you want to eliminate the moisture from the foods well enough that they won't promote mold, and the airflow is important for that. So you want to have enough space around the things that you're drying that the air can flow around them and that moisture can be eliminated. Where things are touching is where mold and damage can occur that will damage the produce or make it not usable, and you have wasted your time. There's several different ways that you can dehydrate foods. One is to air dry them. For example, peppers, you can string them up on a string, and as long as you have space you can tie knots on that cotton string and string them up through their stems or their caps and just hang them to dry. You can put things out on a tray or a towel, covered with a towel to help dehydrate them, or just a lot of times you'll see herbs dried in bundles and then just hung. There is an advantage to that in that it doesn't require electricity, it's simple. The disadvantage is that it takes a little bit longer than if you use some of the other methods. And also, if you don't have them covered, like if you don't have your tray covered, if you don't have your string covered, you just have a bundle of herbs hanging in your kitchen, they're more likely to collect dust and hair. Around here you get cat hair or kitchen grease, things like that. So they're less likely to stay clean. You can also air dry in a paper bag, and that will help protect. As long as you don't overstuff that bag, there's still the flow of moisture out of the bag. And as soon as those are dry, get them put into a nice container where they will stay dry. And that's another way. These are some elderberries that we air dried simply by putting them in this bowl. Just throw a towel, paper towel, dishcloth, whatever, clean towel over top. And there's the design of these little berry groups are nice, so there's plenty of airflow around them. They're small, so that it doesn't take too long for those to dehydrate. So that's a great one. Another way that you can dehydrate is using an oven. One risk with doing that is that ovens don't often go down to very low temperatures, so you're at risk of slightly cooking, so you're going to take away some of the nutrition from the foods that you're dehydrating, and you also run the risk of possibly burning them by getting them too hot or forgetting them or whatever. But that is another method. Now, another one here we have is a dehydrator. Now, if you are so blessed as to have an Excalibur dehydrator, that's wonderful. Those, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people recommend those. I do not have one of those. I have a Nesco that I purchased on sale several years ago for $35 instead of the $150 to $300 or whatever the Excalibur is. This one is cheaper and it works just fine. It probably takes a little bit longer than the Excalibur, and it's probably a little louder, so you can decide for yourself which one would be better. I'll put some links to both in the comments, so in the bottom of the blog post. But these are some peppers. These are some cayenne peppers that I grew last year and dehydrated in the dehydrator. So again, it happens much more quickly than air drying, but it doesn't burn. And if you keep your peppers whole, what's nice about that is they'll store longer. You can keep these for a couple of years. They'll keep their potency better than if you chop or grind them up. So just remember, when you are using them, crushing them into the food as you're cooking, wash your hands before you rub your eyes. Ask me how I know. But that's an option there. So what I've got here today that I'm going to put into my dehydrator, I've got some cayenne that I grew this year. And we can look inside the dehydrator. It has some temperature markings here and some temperature recommendations. You can look in the book that comes with it as well, but you want to keep it as low as you possibly can to prevent cooking them. And then dehydrators generally have, you can see I rinsed this off really well just a minute ago, so I've got water dripping on it. but they have some sort of a grid to help the air flow through. There's a fan. Some of them have them on the bottom, some in the back. I think the Excaliburs have them on the back. Mine's got it on the top. But the air will flow through here constantly to dehydrate. Now it will be a little bit uneven, so as we go we will do some rotating. Some of them will also come with a tray liner like this. So if you have small items, if you're going to do some herbs or some tiny berries like those elderberries, or thyme, which have very tiny leaves, if you want to dehydrate something like that, or to make fruit leather, that's another thing you can do. Besides drying vegetables, you can do pieces of fruit, or you can make fruit leather and spread that out on here. This would be a good thing to use because it doesn't have the holes where things will fall through. And I have had tiny things that required more than one tray. It only came with one of these. You can purchase more, but you can also use parchment paper. So the disadvantage of using parchment paper is that you have to replace it every time, so you have that cost as well as putting trash out there. But you can purchase more, than they are reusable little silicone pads. So we're just going to lay these actually in our dehydrator. Again, for airflow, we are not going to overlap. We're not going to overlap them on the tray here. Give plenty of airflow, and I'm just going to keep them whole. Some of them are smaller, some of them are larger, which just means that some of them will dry faster, and we will take them out sooner. And then now we're going to look at these. These are Principe Borghese tomatoes. They are a kind of like a tiny paste tomato. What's wonderful about paste tomatoes is that they have less moisture in them, less liquid, and they're meatier. So once you're dehydrating them, you have more left over. You haven't gotten rid of everything there is to them. So these are great, like a little mini paste tomato. So I'm going to show you what we do with these. It's very, very simple. You can use paste tomatoes as well. I mean, in addition to being great for making paste and sauces and salsas and things, paste tomatoes are great for doing this as well. These just happen to be a nice tiny size. So I'm going to take these, I've cut it in half, and I'm just going to take my thumb and scoop the little seeds and the liquid out from the center, like that. And I've gotten most of that out. Very simple. And then I'm going to take these and put the cut side up on my tray. So you can put things on the same tray, it doesn't matter. But I will finish cutting these up, and I'm going to keep placing these on my tray. And I will turn this guy on, I think, at, what does this say? This says about 95 degrees to 135, somewhere in that range. I will probably keep it down in the 105 to 110, 15 range, something like that. And it will take a little bit longer to dehydrate, but we will check back on it soon. Okay, this has been dehydrating for a few hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours, and we're just going to check it to see how it's going. Now these are still very moist, so these have quite a while yet to go. And we can check the tomatoes and see how they're doing. And you can see these are a little bit dry. One thing I did not say before is that when you choose vegetables or fruits to dehydrate, you want to choose healthy ones, nothing that is bruised or moldy. If you wouldn't eat it fresh, you don't want to preserve it for long-term storage. So these are still pretty juicy as well. So and as are the other trays here, I'm sure, because that's the closest one to the fan. But we'll check the bottom tray to be sure here. Yes, and you can see these are still pretty juicy. So we're going to let these run a little bit longer until they are a little more dry, and maybe rotate the trays. We want these, when they're done, we still want them to be pliable, but when we squeeze, we don't want any liquid to come out. So you see liquid coming out. We don't want any liquid, but pliable. If they get crispy, they lose a little bit of the flavor, but you will get a few edges that are crispy. And I also forgot to mention, the reason I have them cut side up is because there will be a little bit of juice that leaks out as they sit here, and they will stick here. So having the cut side up just keeps them from sticking, at least for now. So we will turn this back on for a few more hours and we will get back. Okay, these have been dehydrating for probably about 8 hours or so. We started this in the afternoon, and I did turn it off overnight just so they wouldn't get too crisp while I was sleeping. Obviously these peppers are still pretty wet. These are nice big peppers, so they still have quite a bit of moisture in them. They are not ready at all. But let's look at some of these tomatoes. You can see I was checking them every couple of hours or so, and so we have these tomatoes that are done. Put them in this really pretty weck jar. I'll tell you more about these another time, but I put them in here. That's probably at least 20 tomato or 40 halves, 20 whole tomatoes. And you can see how small they get when they dehydrate. So I've taken those out because they're different sizes and different positions in the dehydrator. They will dehydrate at different rates. But I'm going to check these and feel. So this one is almost completely dry. There's a little edge here though that I can feel is just a little squishy still. So I don't want to take that one yet. Let's try this one. This one, and you want to feel all around the whole thing. Have clean hands, of course. And that one is nice and dry. And whoops, and that one fell through. And that one's almost ready, but there's still a little squishy spot here where there's moisture. And you want to make sure you don't have any moisture on these when you store them. Eliminate all of that because it gives an opportunity for mold or botulism to grow. Now you see some of these big ones are still, you could probably tell just by looking that they're still pretty squishy. So we're going to let those go a little bit longer. Okay. So go through here and check all of these. If they have any little wet spots, we're going to keep them. And I did rotate the trays once already, the top to the bottom of the tomatoes. I left the peppers at the top because they're so big, and the fan is at the top, so that's where most of the airflow is going to be, and that'll be good for the peppers to keep drying. But this one is also dry, so I'm going to take that. And we are going to further process these tomatoes when they're all done. I'll show you what we're going to do with them to store them. You can just store them dehydrated like this. It won't hurt anything, but we're going to put oil in them, and we'll show you how that works. But so we're going to keep checking these trays, and over the hours we'll keep checking the tomatoes every so often and keep filling up this jar till we're all done. Okay, we have all of our, I don't know if you remember this bowl full of tomatoes, and this is what we have after they're dehydrated. You will see that they are still pliable. So we've gotten rid of all the moisture out of them, but they're not crisp. So if you get any that are too crisp, which will happen, you can just powder those and make a tomato powder, which you can use for other recipes. But so these are still pliable, so they're not overly dehydrated. What we're going to do now, you can just leave these just like this in the jar and store them that way. There's nothing wrong with that. We are going to store them in olive oil though. So we're going to take these little guys here, and we're going to just give them a dip into some apple cider vinegar. That just helps ensure the killing of any possible microbes. We'll shake all of that off, and then we're going to put that into olive oil, really good raw olive oil. So we're going to keep doing that with these. Now, I told you I was going to tell you a little bit more about these jars. These weck jars, I received these as a gift, and they are very commonly used in Europe for canning, but currently the USDA has not done enough testing, so they call them, they say they're not considered safe for canning. So I will leave that up to you. I have not canned in them, but I've done some reading and research, and it seems like they would be safe if used properly. It's done a little bit differently than the ball mason canning jars, but it seems to me that they've been used for a long time. But I would leave that up to you. Again, the USDA does not consider it safe to use them. So, but they are beautiful jars and certainly worth putting on a shelf and displaying some beautifully preserved foods, whether it's a ferment or these tomatoes or some dried herbs if you have that. Now, one thing to note about putting these in, and speaking of herbs, You do not want to put any fresh herbs in here. Fresh herbs have water in them. So that would, again, introduce water, which would allow for mold and botulism to grow. And so we don't want to introduce that into here. So if you wanted to put some dry herbs, you could, but that's not necessary. You can keep it simple and just put the tomatoes in the olive oil and use them when you're ready, just like you would a sun-dried tomato. So I'm going to keep doing this, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're finished. Okay, we've finished putting our tomatoes into the jar, dipping them and putting them into the olive oil. You can see I've added more olive oil. You want to make sure that the oil covers the tomatoes. You don't want them exposed to air. And as I have more tomatoes coming out of the garden and I get to dehydrate those, I can go ahead and add those in and add more oil. Similarly, if you are doing this and you don't want to save a whole 4 trays worth of tomatoes to dip and to put in here all at one time, you can do them piecemeal. As they come out of the dehydrator, you can go ahead and dip them and put them into the jar at that point in time. And just keep that oil above the tomatoes. Another thing you can do, if you do decide to just store them dry without the oil, you put them in a nice sealed jar. A trick that if you're not sure if they are fully dehydrated, you can look on the jar after they've been in the jar a short bit, and if you see any droplets of moisture on the inside of your jar, that means that they are not dehydrated enough and you're going to have an opportunity for mold to grow. So you're going to want to take those out and dehydrate them some more. So that's another trick. So now we have some tomatoes, and I hope that we'll be able to use these. These should be shelf stable for months to come. So hopefully we will be sharing a recipe with you when it's winter and fresh tomatoes don't have quite the same flavor as garden fresh, and we will have a yummy recipe to share with you.
Please visit the blog post linked in the video description below for more information about this video and the supplies used.